The Duke of Ashcombe took a slow sip of his morning tea and spoke without looking up from the window. "I'd rather lose everything than marry her, Hargrove. The woman thinks she knows horses better than I do." The butler said nothing. Outside the gates of Ashcombe Hall, the storm that had brought Lady Charlotte Marlowe and her father through his doors the night before was finally clearing. But the Duke knew the carriage repairs would keep them in his house for at least 4 more days. 4 days under his roof, with the woman all of London called impossible. Edmund Hartley intended to ignore her completely. He would not succeed. Chapter 1. The storm at Ashcombe Hall. The night before, the rain had come down on the great estate of Ashcombe like a punishment from heaven. Edmund had been in his study when the bell rang at the gates. He remembered the precise moment because he had set down his pen mid-sentence and looked up at the dark window, irritated. No one called at Ashcombe Hall after dark. No one in their right mind travelled the country roads in weather like that. Whoever was at his gates was either desperate or foolish. When Hargrove appeared in the doorway, the butler's voice was as composed as always. "Your Grace, a carriage has broken down on the South Road. Lord Marlowe and his daughter request shelter for the night." Edmund had stared at him for a long moment. "Marlowe," he repeated. "Yes, Your Grace." "The Baron." "Yes, Your Grace." Edmund had set his pen down with deliberate care, as if it might shatter under any sudden movement. He knew the name. Every man in his clubs knew the name. Baron Marlowe, the country gentleman who had lost half his fortune in the canal speculation of 1821 and the other half in the wool collapse of 1823. A decent man, by all accounts. A man who had once owned one of the finest small stud farms in the southern counties before the world turned against him. And the daughter, Lady Charlotte Marlowe, 24 years old, unmarried, and according to every dinner table in London, entirely impossible. He had heard the stories. He had heard them too many times. She had refused the heir to the earldom of Sutton without explanation. She had refused Lord Pembroke twice. She had refused the third son of a viscount and corrected his Latin in front of his mother while doing it. The matrons of London had taken to calling her the spinster with opinions, a name half cruel, half warning, passed from drawing-room to drawing-room like a small sharp coin. Edmund Hartley had no patience for such women. He had married one once. The marriage had ended 4 years ago, quietly, without scandal, by the cold mutual understanding of 2 people who had finally accepted that they wanted nothing of each other. His first wife had been brilliant, beautiful, and cold. She had wanted his title and nothing else. She had made him understand with great precision over the course of 3 loveless years that a woman who knew her own worth was not the same as a woman capable of love. She had returned to her family in the north. He had not seen her since. Since then, Edmund had built his life like a fortress. He had moved permanently to Ashcombe, far from London. He had refused every invitation from every matchmaking mother in the kingdom. He had thrown himself into horses, into the breeding lines of his stables, into the slow and honest business of bringing fine animals into the world. Animals, he had decided long ago, were better company than people, and now Lady Charlotte Marlowe was standing in his entrance hall. "Send them to the drawing-room," he had told Hargrove the night before, rising from his desk, "and tell the kitchen to send up something warm. I will not have it said that the Duke of Ashcombe turned a baron and his daughter into a storm." "Of course, Your Grace." "And Hargrove—" The butler had paused at the door. "Yes, Your Grace." "I will see them once, that is all." She had been standing near the great fireplace when he entered. Her cloak was still on her shoulders, dark and heavy with rain. Her hair had escaped its pins in 2 or 3 places. Her hands were folded in front of her, with a calm that bordered, Edmund thought, on impertinence. Her father had risen from the chair the housekeeper had pressed him into. Lord Marlowe had bowed deeply, his voice rough with cold and gratitude. "Your Grace, we cannot thank you enough. The storm as the carriage went, we should never have imposed." Edmund had inclined his head, the polite gesture, the minimum required. "The roads are no fault of yours, my lord. You are welcome at Ashcombe until your carriage is repaired." The Baron had bowed again, smaller this time, and Edmund had felt a brief, unwelcome twist of something, pity, perhaps, at the way the old man's shoulders trembled, and then he had turned to look at her. Lady Charlotte Marlowe was not what he had expected. He had expected the kind of woman London had described, a sharp-tongued spinster with the eyes of a barrister and the manners of a man. He had imagined her tall, perhaps, plain, severe. She was none of those things. She was small and tired, and standing very still by the fire. Her face was pale from the cold, but not unkind. Her eyes were dark, steady, and entirely unafraid of him. He did not like that last part. He had grown accustomed in the 4 years since his wife had left to a certain quality of fear in the women he met. The solitary Duke of Ashcombe was a figure of some intimidation in the country. Mothers warned their daughters. Hostesses lowered their voices when he entered a room. He had cultivated the effect deliberately. Lady Charlotte was not afraid of him in the slightest. She had not even taken the offered chair. "You'll find my hospitality somewhat reluctant tonight, Lady Marlowe," he had said, swirling brandy in a crystal glass he had no intention of drinking. He had meant the words to land with the small, polite cruelty that turned most well-bred women silent. Her reply came without hesitation. "Curious, Your Grace. I'd assumed dukes preferred to insult their guests in private." Behind him, Hargrove very nearly dropped the decanter. Edmund had not moved. He had not blinked. He had stood there with the glass in his hand and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. A small, hot flicker of interest, sharp and immediate, the kind of sensation a man learns to mistrust because it is almost always a warning. He had set the glass down on the mantel without drinking from it. "Hargrove will show you to your rooms," he had said evenly. "Breakfast is at 8. I trust you will find Ashcombe comfortable." "I'm sure we shall, Your Grace." She had not curtsied. She had inclined her head, a fraction lower than equals, a fraction higher than subordinates, and walked past him to follow the housekeeper out of the room. Edmund had stood at the fireplace for a long time after she was gone. Hargrove had said nothing. He simply collected the untouched glass and waited. "Hargrove." "Your Grace." "How long until that carriage is repaired?" "The wheelwright in the village estimates 4 days, Your Grace. The axle is split." "4 days?" "Yes, Your Grace." Edmund had nodded slowly. He had stared at the fire for another long moment. Then he had turned and gone to bed without another word. He had not slept well. That had been the night before. Now it was Tuesday morning, and Edmund stood at the window of his study with a cup of tea cooling in his hand, watching the last of the storm pull away over the eastern fields. Beyond the gates, somewhere down the south road, his men were already working on the broken carriage. He had sent them at first light. He wanted the woman gone. He wanted her father gone. He wanted his house quiet again. But the wheelwright had been right. The axle was split. The wood needed to be ordered from the village. There was nothing to be done about it. 4 days. He took another sip of his tea and tasted nothing. "Hargrove." "Your Grace, see that her ladyship has whatever she requires today. The library, the gardens, whatever she asks for. I will be at the stables." "Of course, Your Grace." The butler set down the silver tea service on the side table and folded the cloth he had been holding into a neat square. But for the briefest fraction of a second, so brief that any man less attentive than Hargrove would have missed it himself, the corner of the butler's mouth lifted. It was not quite a smile. It was the suggestion of one. Edmund did not see it. Hargrove had served the Hartley family long enough to know that the Dukes of Ashcombe were never more certain of a thing than in the hour before they reversed themselves on it. And his master had been very certain indeed at the window that morning. He kept the suggestion of a smile to himself and went to see about the ladies' requirements. Breakfast was a quiet, careful affair. Lord Marlowe spoke gently of the weather, of the road, of the Duke's kindness. Edmund answered with the minimum politeness required by his station. He did not look at Lady Charlotte. He buttered his bread with great deliberation. He read the morning paper at the table, a small rudeness he would not normally have permitted himself, but which he committed today with a kind of grim satisfaction. She did not appear to notice. She ate her toast. She drank her tea. She asked the footman in a low voice whether the cook could spare a small jar of honey for her father, who preferred it to jam. The footman, flustered, looked at Edmund. Edmund nodded once, without lowering his paper. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said. He did not reply. When breakfast was finished and Lord Marlowe excused himself to rest by the library fire, Lady Charlotte remained at the table for a moment longer. Edmund could feel her looking at him over the top of his newspaper. He did not lower it. After a long moment, he heard her chair scrape gently against the floor. "Your Grace." He lowered the paper at last, just enough to meet her eyes. Lady Marlowe, your stable boy passed me in the corridor this morning carrying a poultice and a great deal of worry on his face. May I ask whether one of your horses is in some trouble?" Edmund had not been expecting the question. His grip on the paper tightened. "Iliad," he said shortly. "My finest mare. She is due to foal within the week." "And the worry?" "Is not your concern, Lady Marlowe." She studied him for a moment. Her face was unreadable. "Of course, Your Grace." "Forgive me." She rose, inclined her head, that same fraction of distance, and left the dining room. Edmund stared at the door for a long time after it closed. Then he set the newspaper down very carefully on the table and rose to go to the stables himself. The hours that followed passed slowly. Edmund spent the morning with Iliad. The mare was restless. Mr. Briggs, his head groom, was watchful but not alarmed. The foal was simply taking its time, he said. There was nothing to be done but wait. Edmund waited. He told himself he was waiting for the mare. He was not, he told himself, thinking about the woman at his breakfast table. He was certainly not thinking about the way she had looked at him over the rim of her teacup, as if she could see precisely the shape of his foul mood, and had decided quietly and without ceremony that she would not be troubled by it. He was not thinking about her at all. When he returned to the house in the late afternoon, the sky was already darkening again. Another storm, smaller than the first, was rolling in from the west. The wind had picked up. The horses in the lower pastures had been brought in early. He passed Lady Charlotte in the long corridor outside the library. She was carrying a book. She glanced at him as he passed, a brief glance, polite, neither warm nor cold, and continued on her way. He did not stop. He did not speak. But 3 steps past her, against his own will, he turned his head and looked back. She was already gone. That night, the wind picked up again. Edmund could hear it howling against the high windows of the east wing as he sat in his study by the fire. He had a book open on his lap. He had not read a single page of it. Somewhere far down the corridor, a clock struck 11. He was just about to close the book and go up to bed when he heard it. Running footsteps. Boots on stone, fast and uneven, coming up the servants' stairs. Edmund stood. A moment later, the door to his study burst open without a knock. Mr. Briggs stood in the doorway, his coat thrown on over his shirt, his face drawn and pale. "Your Grace, the mare, it started, and something's wrong." Edmund was already moving. "The vet." "The road's washed out again, Your Grace. The boy went, but it'll be hours before he's back. Maybe morning." Edmund swore quietly. He pulled his coat from the chair and was halfway to the door when Briggs spoke again, hesitantly. "Your Grace, there's something else." Edmund stopped. "What?" Briggs swallowed. "Lady Marlowe is in the stable, Your Grace. She heard. She's already with the mare." For a long moment the Duke of Ashcombe did not move. Then, very quietly, he said, "What?" Chapter 2. The Stable at Midnight. Mr. Briggs shifted his weight in the doorway. The head groom was a man who had served at Ashcombe for 30 years. He had broken horses, trained horses, delivered foals in every kind of weather. He was not a man easily disturbed. He looked disturbed now. "She came down to the stable, Your Grace, about half an hour past. Said she'd heard one of the boys running in the corridor. I told her it was no place for a lady. She didn't quite listen, Your Grace." "She didn't listen." "No, Your Grace. She is in my stable." "Yes, Your Grace. With my mare." "With your mare, Your Grace." "At 11 o'clock at night." "Yes, Your Grace." Edmund closed his eyes for the briefest of seconds. Then he picked up the lantern from the desk and walked past Briggs without another word. The corridor outside the study was cold. The fires in the lower halls had been banked for the night, and the wind was rattling the windows in a steady, low rhythm that sounded to Edmund like the world itself disapproving. He went down the servants' stairs 2 at a time. Briggs hurried after him. "Your Grace, she did say something just before I left to fetch you. I do not wish to know what she said, Briggs." "Yes, Your Grace." They crossed the kitchen yard in silence. The air outside was sharp and wet, full of the smell of soaked stone and turned earth. The storm had not yet returned in full, but the wind was up, and the stable lanterns were burning bright through the high windows of the long barn. Edmund pushed the heavy door open. The smell hit him first. Warm hay, animal sweat, the deep particular scent of a mare in labour. The long aisle of the stable was dim, lit only by 2 lanterns hung from the beams. Most of the horses were quiet in their boxes, drowsing or watching with the slow patience of animals that have learned not to be afraid of human urgency. At the far end of the aisle, the door of Iliad's box was open. Edmund walked the length of the stable without hurrying. He could hear his own boots on the stone. He could hear the mare's breathing, laboured, irregular, but not panicked, and he could hear, very softly, a woman's voice, talking, not commanding, not soothing in the empty, performative way that most people spoke to animals. Talking, the way one might talk to an old friend in a difficult hour. He stopped at the open door of the box and looked inside. Lady Charlotte Marlowe was kneeling in the straw. She was not in the morning dress she had worn at breakfast. She had thrown a dark wool shawl over what appeared to be a simple grey dressing robe, plain and long, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Her hair was bound back in a single loose braid that had clearly been done in great haste. Strands had already escaped at her temples. Her feet, he noted with something close to disbelief, were in a pair of riding boots that did not belong to her. Mr. Briggs's spare boots by the look of them, 3 sizes too large. She did not look up when he entered. She was speaking to the mare in a low, steady voice, the kind of voice Edmund had heard, once or twice in his life, from men who had spent a lifetime working with horses, and understood that animals listened more carefully to tone than to words. "There now, my girl. I know. I know it is taking a long time. You are very tired, but you are doing it beautifully." Iliad was lying on her side. Her flanks were dark with sweat. Her great dark eye rolled once toward the door, registered Edmund, and turned back to the woman at her head. Edmund did not move from the doorway. "Lady Marlowe." She did not look at him. "Your Grace." "Close the door, please. The cold is worse for her now than your presence." He did not close the door. "Lady Marlowe, you will rise. You will go back to the house. This is not a place for— Forgive me, Your Grace." Now she did look up. Her face was pale in the lantern light. There was straw in her hair. There was a small smudge of something, dust, perhaps, along her jaw. Her dark eyes were entirely calm. "I will gladly leave the moment your veterinarian arrives. Until then your mare is in trouble, and I have done this before. If you would prefer your pride to your foal, by all means send me away. But you will lose them both before the road is passable." The stable was very quiet. Behind Edmund, Mr. Briggs had stopped in the aisle. He was looking with great concentration at a point on the stone floor just to the left of his own boots. Edmund stood in the doorway for one long, suspended moment. Then he stepped inside. He set the lantern on the hook above the box. He removed his coat and laid it across the half-door. He rolled his sleeves to the elbow with a precision that had nothing to do with the situation and everything to do with the fact that he did not know what else to do with his hands. "Tell me what you need," he said. She did not look surprised. She did not look triumphant. She simply nodded once, as if he had said the only sensible thing she expected him to say, and turned back to the mare. "Clean cloths, as many as Mr. Briggs can spare. A small bowl of warm water, not hot." And the lantern moved closer. "I cannot see what I am doing." "Briggs." "At once, Your Grace." The groom hurried off into the dark of the aisle. Edmund crouched down on the other side of the mare's head. Up close in the warm light, the mare's distress was clearer. Her breathing was rough, her muscles trembled at intervals, but her eye, when it found him, was not the wild, white-rimmed eye of a panicked animal. It was the slow, dull eye of an animal that had decided to trust the people around her. "How long has she been like this?" he asked quietly. 2 hours by Mr. Briggs's count. The foal has turned wrong, I felt it. It needs to be moved before she can finish." "You felt it?" "Yes, Your Grace." He looked at her across the long, dark length of the mare. "Where?" he said carefully. "Did you learn this?" Charlotte did not look up. She was running her hand, slowly and steadily, along the mare's neck. "I was born in a stable, Mr. Briggs," she said, and then catching herself she gave the smallest, driest smile he had ever seen on a woman's face. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I was born in a stable, or near enough. My father kept a small stud farm in Hertfordshire before he lost it. I learned to do this when I was 12 years old. The man who taught me said that a woman who could not midwife a mare in trouble had no business calling herself a horseman's daughter. Your father taught you this." "My father taught me everything, Your Grace. Edmund did not answer. Mr. Briggs returned with the cloths and the water. He set them down at Charlotte's side without a word. He looked, very briefly, at the Duke. The Duke did not look back. For the next hour, Edmund Hartley did something he had not done in his entire life as a peer of the realm. He did as he was told. He held the mare's head when Charlotte told him to. He passed her cloths when she asked. He spoke low, steady words into Iliad's ear when the mare's breathing grew rough, words he did not remember choosing, only that they came and that they helped. Charlotte did the rest. She worked with her sleeves rolled and her hands sure. She did not speak more than was necessary. When she did speak, it was to the mare. There came a point, Edmund could not afterward have said exactly when, at which he stopped watching her as a guest in his house and began watching her as a person doing a thing that very few people in England could have done. She was not performing. She was not afraid. She was simply quietly very good. And the strangest part, the part that bothered Edmund most hours later, when he lay awake in his bed staring at the ceiling, was that she had not looked at him once during the worst of it. Not for approval, not for permission, not for help. She had worked as if he were a stable hand she happened to be sharing a box with, and she had spoken to him in the same calm, level tone she used with the mare. He had never in his life been so thoroughly not noticed. It was nearly 2 in the morning when the foal came. A small, dark, wet thing, all impossibly long legs and astonished eyes, slid into the straw with one last shudder of the mare's body, and was alive. Charlotte sat back on her heels. Her hands trembled, just once, and then was still. "There," she said softly. "Not to Edmund, not to Briggs, to the mare. There, my girl, there. You did beautifully. You did so beautifully." Iliad's great dark eye blinked slowly. The foal lifted its head. Mr. Briggs, who had been standing in the aisle with his hat in his hands for the last 40 minutes, made a small sound in his throat, a sound that, in a less restrained man, might have been a sob, and turned away. Edmund did not move. He was looking at Charlotte. She had a smear of sawdust along the line of her jaw. Her braid had come almost entirely undone. The sleeve of her grey robe had a long dark mark across it. She was paler than she had been an hour ago, and there were shadows under her eyes the colour of dark wine. She had never looked, he thought, less like a London spinster. She had never looked, he thought, with a sudden cold pull in his chest, more like someone he would have wanted to know. He looked away. "Mr. Briggs," he said. "Your Grace. Stay with the mare. Send a boy up to the house for hot water and clean linen. Lady Marlowe needs nothing, Your Grace." Charlotte was getting to her feet. She did so without his help. She brushed straw from her robe with both hands. She did not meet his eyes. "The foal will stand within the hour, the mare will rest. She will need watching until dawn, but the worst is past. Mr. Briggs can manage. You should not walk back alone. I am perfectly capable of walking back alone, Your Grace. Lady Marlowe," she finally looked at him. Her dark eyes were unreadable. "Close the door on your way out, Your Grace. The cold is worse for them now than your presence." It was the second time she had said it to him. She did not say it cruelly. She did not say it as a barb. She said it as a simple instruction, the kind one gives to a man one has decided is competent enough to follow it. She did not curtsy. She walked past him out of the box, out of the long lantern-lit aisle, and into the dark of the stable-yard. For a long time after she was gone, the Duke of Ashcombe stood at the open door of the box and watched his mare breathe, and his foal lift its head, and the lantern sway gently in the small wind that came through the rafters. Behind him, Mr. Briggs cleared his throat, very softly. "Your Grace." "Yes." "Forgive me, Your Grace, for speaking out of turn." "Speak." The old groom hesitated. He turned his hat once in his hands. "That lady, Your Grace, she did what 3 of my men could not have done tonight. I have been with horses for 41 years. I have seen good women with horses. I have never seen better than that." Edmund did not turn around. "Thank you, Briggs." "Your Grace?" "Stay with the mare. I am going to bed." "Yes, Your Grace." Edmund picked up his coat from the half-door. He did not put it on. He carried it under his arm as he walked the long aisle of the stable, past the drowsing horses, past the silent stalls, past the place where Charlotte Marlowe's small footprints in Mr. Briggs's borrowed boots had left a faint, uneven trail in the straw. He stepped out into the night. The storm was not coming. The sky over Ashcombe had cleared. Above the dark line of the eastern fields, a single star was burning, very steady, very bright. Edmund stood in the cold for a long moment. Then he walked back to the house alone. He did not see, as he crossed the courtyard, the small figure in the grey robe standing at the high window of the east guest room, looking down at him. He did not see her step back from the window when he reached the door. He did not see anything at all. But for the first time in 4 years, when Edmund Hartley climbed the great stairs of Ashcombe Hall and turned, by habit, toward his own bedroom, he stopped at the landing. He stood there for a long moment with his hand on the cold stone of the banister. And then, very quietly, almost without meaning to, he looked once down the long dark corridor that led to the east guest wing. He did not move toward it. He did not need to. He simply stood there in the dark, with the smell of the stable still on his hands, and understood, with the deep, unwelcome certainty of a man who had spent 4 years constructing a fortress and watched it crack in a single night, that he had made a terrible mistake at breakfast that morning. He had told himself he would ignore her. He was not going to be able to ignore her. He was not going to be able to ignore her at all. Chapter 3. The Book Beneath the Oak. The Duke of Ashcombe did not sleep. He lay in his great bed in the east-facing master room and watched the sky turn slowly from black to grey to the pale, cold blue of an English morning. He listened to the house wake around him, the soft tread of housemaids in the corridor, the distant clang of the kitchen, the low whicker of a horse out in the yard. He listened to all of it without moving. He had not undressed. At 7 o'clock he rose. At 7:30 he was at the stables. Mr. Briggs was already there. The old groom had not slept either. He stood with his arms folded over the half-door of Iliad's box, watching the mare and the foal with the slow, satisfied attention of a man who has lived to see a good night end well. "Your Grace." "How is she?" "Tired, eating. The little one is on his feet." Edmund looked over the door. Iliad was standing now. Her great dark head was lowered to a pile of fresh hay. She was eating slowly. At her side, on legs that still looked impossibly long for the small, dark body they supported, the colt was nosing curiously at her flank. It was the kind of sight that, on any other morning, would have given Edmund Hartley the deepest satisfaction his life was capable of providing. This morning, he barely saw it. "Has she been here?" he asked. Mr. Briggs did not need to ask who she meant. "No, Your Grace." Edmund nodded once. "Send a boy for me if anything changes." "Yes, Your Grace." He turned and walked back to the house. Breakfast was again a quiet affair. Lord Marlow was in better spirits this morning. The Baron praised the eggs, the toast, the marmalade. He spoke fondly of country breakfasts in years past. He apologized once for the imposition of his presence. He was a man, Edmund saw clearly now, who had been carrying a great weight for a very long time, and who was, against his own better judgment, enjoying the simple luxury of someone else's table. Lady Charlotte was not there. Edmund did not ask after her. He read his paper, he buttered his toast, he drank his tea. Halfway through the meal, the housekeeper appeared at his shoulder and murmured something near his ear. "Lady Marlow begs Your Grace's pardon. She slept late and asks if she might take her breakfast in the small parlour." "She may take it where she pleases," Edmund said without looking up. "Yes, Your Grace." The housekeeper withdrew. Edmund finished his toast. When the meal was over, Lord Marlow excused himself to the library, and Edmund went to his study and shut the door, and sat down at his desk with the very firm intention of attending to estate correspondence for the rest of the morning. He read the first letter 3 times without taking in a single word. He set it down. He rose from his desk. He walked to the window. The morning was clear. The gardens of Ashcombe spread out below him in the cold spring light. The long lawn, the formal hedges, the old stone bench beneath the great oak at the western edge of the rose walk. The oak had stood there, Edmund's grandfather had once told him, since before the house itself. There was someone sitting on the bench beneath it. A small figure in a dark green walking dress, a shawl, a book. Edmund stood at the window for a long moment, with one hand flat against the cold glass. Then he turned, picked up his coat from the back of the chair, and went outside. He did not, he told himself, intend to speak to her. He intended to walk the western path, as he often did in the morning. He intended to inspect the rose canes that the storm had knocked about. He intended to take the air. The fact that the western path passed within 30 feet of the old oak was, he told himself, immaterial. His boots crunched on the wet gravel. She did not look up as he approached. She was reading. He could see now that he was closer, the small leather binding of the book in her lap. He could see the careful way she held it, flat against her knee, one finger marking the place on the page, the other hand resting in her lap. She was wrapped in the dark shawl against the morning cold, and her cheeks were pink from the air, and her dark hair was pinned up properly today in the way a lady's hair was meant to be pinned. There was no sign at all, looking at her now, of the woman who had knelt in the straw of his stable until 2 o'clock in the morning, with her sleeves rolled to her elbows, except, perhaps, for the shadows beneath her eyes. Edmund stopped on the path. "Lady Marlowe." "Your Grace." She still did not look up. "You are reading." "I am, Your Grace." "What?" It was a single word. It came out shorter than he had meant it to. Now, finally, she looked up. Her dark eyes were perfectly mild. "Marcus Aurelius, Your Grace, the Meditations, Book 4. In translation. In the original Latin, Your Grace." There was the smallest pause. "The original Latin." "Yes, Your Grace." She held the book up, briefly, so that he could see the page. The dense, narrow columns of Latin script were unmistakable. Edmund did not move from the path. "Most ladies of my acquaintance," he said, "prefer their philosophy in English. Most ladies of your acquaintance, Your Grace, were not raised by a father who could not afford an English translation, but happened to own a Latin one." She said it without sharpness. She said it the way she had said, "I was born in a stable," the night before. As a simple fact, a piece of biography offered without apology. Edmund felt for the second time in less than a day something close to off-balance. He stepped onto the grass. "What does Aurelius say this morning, Lady Marlowe?" He had meant the question to be sardonic. He had meant it to invite her to stumble, to retreat into vague platitudes, or to admit, with a fluttering smile, that she had not really been reading at all. She did not stumble. She looked back down at the page. "He says that the only thing a man can truly control is his own mind, that the opinions of others, the cruelty of strangers, the misfortunes of the body, none of these can touch the part of him that thinks and chooses. He says that a man who masters this is free, and a man who does not master this is a slave regardless of his station." She lifted her eyes to his. "He says it rather better than I have just done, Your Grace. But that is the substance of it." Edmund was silent. The substance of it had hit him very precisely in the centre of the chest. He took a small breath. "And do you believe him, Lady Marlowe? That a man can master his own mind?" "Yes." She considered the question, genuinely. She turned the small book over once in her lap, and looked away from him for a moment, toward the far hedge where a robin was hopping along the top of the box. "I believe," she said slowly, "that very few men try. I believe that those who do not try mistake their lack of effort for impossibility. I believe that Marcus Aurelius was an emperor of Rome, and that he wrote those words in a tent during a war, and that if a man with the world on his shoulders could believe it, then it is at least an argument worth answering." Edmund stood on the grass and looked down at her. "You speak of him," he said quietly, "as though you knew him." She smiled, the smallest, driest smile, and looked back at the page. "Books are the only acquaintances, Your Grace, who never disappoint you by becoming someone else over time." For a long moment, the Duke of Ashcombe did not speak. He had come out here, he understood now, with a kind of distant, surprised clarity, fully intending to humiliate her. He had wanted to find her pretending to read a difficult book, pretending to know things she did not know, pretending to be the kind of woman whose intelligence was a costume rather than a habit. He had wanted, very specifically, to prove that the woman who had knelt in his stable last night was not as remarkable as Mr. Briggs had said. He had wanted his fortress back. Instead, she had quoted Marcus Aurelius at him from memory in Latin, on the subject of a man who could not master his own mind. He looked away from her. He looked at the robin in the hedge. After a long moment, he said, "My grandfather had a copy of the Meditations in his library in Latin. He thought it the finest book in the house. Did you read it, Your Grace?" I did. And what did you think? Edmund did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower than he had intended. I thought, he said, that it was a book written by a man who was very lonely. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very softly, Yes. I thought so too, Your Grace. The robin in the hedge took off in a quick brown rush of wings. Edmund did not look at her. He looked at the place where the bird had been. Good morning, Lady Marlowe. Good morning, Your Grace. He walked away from the bench beneath the oak. He did not look back. He did not need to. He could feel her eyes on him until the path turned at the far hedge and the oak was hidden from view. He did not return to his study. He walked instead. He walked the long western path, past the rose walk, past the small ornamental pond his mother had loved, past the iron gate that led out to the lower pasture. He walked the lower pasture at the slow, deliberate pace of a man trying to outwalk a thought. He did not outwalk it. He came back to the house at noon. He took his luncheon alone in the dining room. He attended to 2 letters and signed 3 documents and dictated a brief note to his land agent. He did all of this in a state of dim, slow surprise. Surprise at himself, surprise at his own thoughts, surprise at the fact that a woman he had told his butler that morning he would rather lose everything than marry had managed, in less than a single conversation, to make the long western path of his own estate feel too small to contain him. He did not see Lady Charlotte for the rest of the day. He told himself he was glad of it. He was not glad of it. That evening after dinner, the Baron retired early to the library to sit by the fire. Lady Charlotte excused herself to her rooms with a quiet inclination of the head and a soft, "Good evening, Your Grace." Edmund did not answer her. He sat in the drawing-room alone with a glass of brandy he did not drink. The fire burned low. At some point, Hargrove came to remove the tray of untouched cordial glasses. The butler moved through the room with his usual quiet competence. He did not speak. He simply collected the things he had come to collect and turned to go. At the door, he paused. "Your Grace." "Hargrove." "Will Your Grace be wanting the brandy decanter refreshed?" "No." "Very good, Your Grace." The butler did not leave. Edmund looked up. "Was there something else, Hargrove?" The old butler stood in the doorway with the tray balanced on one hand. He had served in this house for nearly 40 years. He had served Edmund's father. He had served Edmund's grandfather when Edmund's grandfather had been a young man with his whole life ahead of him. He said very quietly, "Lord Marlowe has asked to speak with me in the library at 10 o'clock, Your Grace." "With you?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Why?" Hargrove hesitated. "I believe, Your Grace, that he wishes to settle the small matter of his board and his daughters, and to determine the rate of compensation that would be appropriate." Edmund stared at him. "He wishes to pay me?" "Yes, Your Grace, I believe so." "For shelter from a storm?" "Yes, Your Grace." Edmund set down his glass on the small table beside his chair. He set it down very carefully, as if it were something fragile or something dangerous, or both. "He will offer you what he cannot afford." "I believe so, Your Grace." "And what would Your Grace wish me to say?" Edmund was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Say nothing tonight. Hear him, be courteous, promise nothing, and come to me afterward." "Yes, Your Grace." "Hargrove." "Your Grace." "How much do they have?" The butler hesitated. "From what I have been able to gather from his lordship's man, Your Grace, very little. The estate is mortgaged. The interest is in arrears. The Baron has, I believe, perhaps a year of solvency remaining, less if the spring crop is poor." "A year?" "Yes, Your Grace." "And Lady Charlotte?" "Your Grace." "What of Lady Charlotte?" "If her father— when her father— what becomes of her?" Hargrove was a man who had been trained from boyhood to keep his face still. He kept his face still now. "She has no fortune of her own, Your Grace. She has no other family but her father. She has, I am told, refused 3 offers of marriage in the last 4 years. I do not know why." Edmund did not look at him. "You do not know why?" "No, Your Grace. But you have a guess." "I have a guess, Your Grace." "Then guess." Hargrove was silent for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "I would guess, Your Grace, that she refused them because she would not be parted from her father. He has no one else." Edmund sat very still in his chair. The fire popped softly. A coal shifted. Somewhere far above, in the east guest wing, a single light was burning in a high window. Edmund could see the faint glow of it reflected faintly in the dark glass of the drawing-room window opposite him. "Hargrove, Your Grace." "Go to your meeting with Lord Marlowe." "Yes, Your Grace." "Tell him nothing of what I have asked you. Tell him I have not yet decided the matter of his board." "Yes, Your Grace." "And Hargrove, Your Grace." "Listen carefully." The butler inclined his head. "Always, Your Grace." He left. The door closed softly behind him. Edmund Hartley sat alone in his drawing-room and watched the fire and the faint reflection of the light in the high east window, and did not move at all for a very long time. Chapter 4. The Voice in the Corridor. Hargrove returned to the drawing-room at 10:30. The fire had burned lower. Edmund had not moved from his chair. The brandy on the table beside him was still untouched. The butler closed the door behind him with the soft, practiced silence of a man who had been closing doors in this house for 40 years. "Your Grace." "Sit, Hargrove." The butler did not sit. He never sat in the drawing-room. He stood, as he always stood, at the small, respectful distance from his master's chair that decades of training had set into the very bones of his posture. "Tell me," Edmund said quietly. Hargrove drew a slow breath. "His lordship was very gracious, Your Grace. He apologized at length for the imposition. He said he had not slept easily since their arrival for the worry of being a burden. He offered me, that is, he offered Your Grace, through me, the sum of £40 for board, stabling, and the use of Your Grace's wheelwright in the village. £40. Yes, Your Grace. For 4 days. Yes, Your Grace." Edmund stared into the fire. "He cannot have £40, Hargrove." "No, Your Grace, he cannot." "Then how—" "I believe, Your Grace, that he intends to sell the grey mare, the one he brought with the carriage. It is the last horse he owns." Edmund closed his eyes for a moment. The grey mare. He had noticed her in the stable-yard on the night they arrived. An old plain animal, well-mannered and steady, the kind of horse a country gentleman of modest means kept for a lifetime because she was reliable and because he had grown fond of her. Not a horse worth £40 even on her best day. Lord Marlowe had not offered Edmund money. Lord Marlowe had offered him the last animal he owned in the world. "What did you say to him?" "I said that Your Grace had not yet considered the matter of compensation, and that I would convey his offer with thanks. I did not accept. I did not refuse. I told him Your Grace would speak with him in the morning." "Good." "Your Grace—" Edmund looked up. "Yes." Hargrove hesitated. It was a thing the butler almost never did. His lordship cried, "Your Grace," quietly. He turned his face to the fire and did not wish me to see it, but he did. "I have not seen a peer of this realm cry in this house since Your Grace's grandfather faced his hardest winter." Edmund did not answer at once. When he did, his voice was very low. "Thank you, Hargrove." "Your Grace." "That will be all tonight." "Yes, Your Grace." The butler turned to leave. At the door, his hand on the brass, he paused once more. "Your Grace." "Yes." "Forgive me." "For what?" "For the liberty of saying, Your Grace, that Lord Marlowe is a good man who has been ruined by his own kindness. He was generous when he could afford to be, and he stood as guarantor for friends who did not stand as guarantor for him in return. He is not a fool. He is not a wastrel. He is simply a man who trusted the wrong people and has run out of time." "And his daughter," Edmund said quietly. Hargrove was silent for a moment. "His daughter, Your Grace, knows every word of it, and has, I believe, known it for longer than her father imagines." The butler bowed once and left. Edmund sat alone for a long time with the fire and the unlit candles, and the small distant glow of the high east window, reflected in the dark glass opposite him. He did not go to bed. It was nearly midnight when he rose. He did not know afterward why he had decided to walk the corridor of the library wing at that hour. He had not consciously decided anything. He had simply risen from the chair, blown out the last candle, and walked. He carried no light. He did not need one. He had walked this house in the dark since he was a boy. The library doors were closed, but the great hall outside the library was not entirely dark. A single sconce had been left burning, low against the far wall, the housekeeper's small mercy to a guest who might wish to read late. Edmund had nearly passed the library door when he heard the voices. He stopped. He did not mean to listen. He stopped because the voice was the Baron's, and because the Baron at this hour ought to have been long asleep, and because the voice was carrying the particular quiet, trembling note of a man speaking through tears. "I cannot allow it, Charlotte. I will not allow it. We will manage another way. We have always managed." "Father." The second voice was lower, calmer. Edmund did not need to be told whose it was. He knew it by now in a way he could not have explained. "Father, please sit down. You are not to upset yourself. I have ruined you, child." There was a small silence. Then Charlotte's voice very quietly, "You have done no such thing. You should have married Lord Pembroke. You should have married any of them. You should be the mistress of a great house by now, with children, with security, with a life of your own. Instead, you sit here in a stranger's library at midnight, comforting a foolish old man who has nothing left to give you but his apologies. Father, I gave Hargrove the grey mare tonight. I know you did." There was a pause, a very long one. "You knew. I overheard you speaking to Mr. Briggs this morning. Father, you cannot give him Daisy. She is the last. It is £40 owed to the Duke. It is £40 we do not have. It is Daisy. She has been with you for 16 years. Then what would you have me do, child?" The Baron's voice broke a little. "What would you have me do? I cannot pay him in coin. I cannot pay him in goods. I will not have it said in any club in England that Baron Marlowe accepted a duke's hospitality and walked away owing him so much as a farthing. I have my name. It is the only thing I have left to give you. I will not lose it in his drawing-room." There was a long silence in the library. When Charlotte spoke again, her voice had changed. It was steadier than before. It was the same low, level voice Edmund had heard her use with the mare 2 nights ago. The voice of a person who had decided a thing and would not be moved. "Then let me speak with him." "Charlotte." "Let me speak with him, Father. I will explain. I will ask for time. I will ask him to take Daisy at a fair price and credit us the difference. He is not an unreasonable man." "He is the Duke of Ashcombe." "Yes." "He is known throughout the country for being unreasonable." "Yes, Father. So I have been told." "He despises us, Charlotte. He has barely looked at us since we arrived. He sits at his table and reads his paper, and answers in monosyllables, and treats us as though we are an inconvenience to be endured." "I know what he is, Father." "Then, and I will speak with him anyway." There was another silence. When the Baron spoke again, his voice was thick. "You should not have to. You should not have to bear any of this. You should be in your own home, Charlotte, with your own husband, with your own children. You should not be here." "Father, you refused 3 offers. 3. Any one of them would have given you a life. Why, Father, why did you—" "Because you would not have lived a year alone, and you know it." The library was perfectly silent. Edmund Hartley stood in the dark corridor with one hand flat against the cold panelling of the wall. He could not see her. He could not see either of them. He could only hear the small, exhausted sound of an old man weeping very quietly in a room he was not meant to be in, and the calm, low voice of his daughter speaking the truth of her life into the silence. "You would not have lived a year alone, Father. My mother has been gone for many years now, and it has been only you and me in that house for as long as I can remember. If I had married Lord Pembroke, you would have shut yourself in your study by Christmas. If I had married any of them, you would not be sitting in this library tonight. You would be in a small room somewhere with no one to bring you your honey in the morning, and no one to read to you when your eyes are tired, and no one to argue with you about Greek philosophy at the dinner table. And I would be the mistress of a great house, as you say, and I would be utterly, utterly alone in it, knowing that I had bought my comfort with your life." She paused. "I did not refuse them because I am proud, Father. I refused them because I am yours. There has never been any other reason. There is no other reason now." The Baron was crying. Not quietly anymore, the small broken sobs of a man at the end of his strength. "I do not deserve you, child. You raised me. You sat beside my bed when I was 7 years old and read me the Iliad in Greek because the English translation displeased you. You taught me to ride. You taught me Latin. You taught me to love a horse and to value a book and to walk into a stable in the middle of the night when one of God's creatures was in trouble. Of course you deserve me. You made me. There was a long, trembling pause. "Sit down now, Father. I will speak with His grace in the morning. We will find a way through this. We have always found a way through." "Charlotte, sit down." After a moment, Edmund heard the soft creak of a chair receiving a weight. He heard very faintly the rustle of a shawl being arranged around an old man's shoulders. He heard a soft, low murmur of a daughter's voice, too low now to catch the words, speaking the small ordinary comforts that grown daughters speak to their aging fathers in rooms where they believe themselves to be alone. Edmund stepped back from the wall. He moved down the corridor with the same silence he had moved through it for 30 years. He did not look back at the library door. He did not breathe properly until he reached the foot of the great staircase. He climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the cold stone of the banister. At the landing he stopped. He stood there for a long time in the dark. "A small note here, friend. Wherever you are watching this from tonight, I'd love to know. Drop the name of your city in the comments below before we go on. It always means something to me to picture where this story is being heard." Now, back to Ashcombe Hall, and to a man at the top of a staircase who could not quite seem to make himself move. He did not sleep. He sat in the chair by the cold fireplace in his bedroom, with his coat still on, and watched the grey edge of dawn come up over the eastern fields. He thought of many things. He thought of his first wife, who had been brilliant and beautiful, and had married him for his title, and who had told him once, calmly and without raising her voice, that she had never been able to love him because he was a man whose first loyalty would always be to a horse. He thought of how he had agreed with her at the time and felt very little about it. He thought of his grandfather, who loved his grandmother every day still, and who had told Edmund once when he was 12 years old that a man's measure was not what he could acquire, but what he refused to take from those who could not afford to give it. He thought of the grey mare in his stable yard, 16 years old, plain, steady, belonging to a baron who had cried in his library tonight rather than walk out of this house owing him £40. He thought of Charlotte Marlowe, who had been raised on Greek and Latin and horses, who had refused 3 offers of marriage in 4 years and had told no one in the world why. He thought of her kneeling in the straw at 2 in the morning with her sleeves rolled to her elbows, saving a foal he had not even known he was about to lose. He thought of her under the oak tree in the morning sun, agreeing with him in a single quiet sentence when he had told her the Meditations was a book written by a man who was very lonely. He thought of her standing in the dark library tonight, telling her father, and without dramatics, without bitterness, with the calm steadiness of a person who had decided long ago and would not be moved. "I did not refuse them because I am proud. I refused them because I am yours." The fire was out in the grate. The room was cold. Edmund Hartley sat in his chair and understood slowly, with the dim, distant clarity of a man watching the floor of his own life shift beneath him, that he had spent 4 years building a fortress against women like the woman he'd imagined Charlotte Marlowe to be, and that the woman she actually was had walked into his house 3 nights ago in a wet cloak and asked for shelter, and he had given her shelter, and he had not understood, until tonight, what he had been given in return. She would speak with him in the morning, she had told her father. She would ask for time. She would offer the grey mare. She would attempt, calmly and without sentiment, to settle an accounting that should never have been hers to settle. Edmund Hartley sat in the cold of his own bedroom and decided that she would not have to. He rose from the chair. He went to the small writing desk by the window. He opened the top drawer. From it, he took a small object that had belonged to his mother, a thing he had not looked at in 12 years and had not expected to look at again, and held it for a long moment in the palm of his hand. He closed his fingers around it. He put on his coat. The first grey light was just beginning to touch the eastern fields when the Duke of Ashcombe walked out of his own front door and turned, without hurry, toward the stables. Chapter 5. The Stable at Dawn. The stable doors were already open when Edmund Hartley reached them. He walked without hurry across the yard. The small object from his mother's drawer was closed in his right fist, held against his side, where his coat hid it. He did not look at it. He had looked at it once in the dim light of his bedroom, 12 years ago when his mother had pressed it into his palm on the morning she left Ashcombe for the country, and he had not looked at it again since. He did not need to look at it now. He knew its weight. Inside Mr. Briggs was nowhere in sight. A single boy was sweeping the far end of the aisle in the slow, dutiful rhythm of the very early morning. He did not see the Duke enter. Edmund walked the long stone aisle past the drowsing horses. At the far end, the door of Iliad's box was open, just as it had been 3 nights ago. She was there. She was wearing the green walking dress this morning, the one she had worn beneath the oak. Her shawl lay folded on the half-door. Her sleeves were not rolled. Her hair was pinned properly. There was nothing in her appearance to suggest a woman who had spent the small hours of the night in a library, holding her father while he wept. She was brushing the mare. Long, slow strokes down Iliad's shoulder. The mare stood with her head low and her great dark eye half-closed, the way horses stand when they have decided that the hand on them is one they trust. The colt, already steadier on his impossible legs, was nosing at a small heap of fresh hay in the corner. Charlotte did not look up when Edmund stopped at the open door. "You are up early, Lady Marlowe." "I am, Your Grace." "You did not sleep." "I slept some." She did not turn. She drew the brush down the mare's flank in another slow, even stroke. Iliad sighed contentedly. "She remembers you," Edmund said. "Horses remember everything, Your Grace. It is one of their kindnesses." Edmund stepped into the box. He did not move to her side. He stood at the door with the foal between them in the straw and looked at her for a long moment in the grey light. "Lady Marlowe, Your Grace, I owe you an apology." The brush paused, only for a fraction of a moment against the mare's coat. Then it resumed. "For what, Your Grace?" "For 3 days of unkindness." Charlotte was silent. She drew the brush down once more. She set it on the small wooden shelf inside the box. She turned at last and looked at him with the same dark, level eyes she had turned on him 3 nights ago in his own drawing room when he had tried to insult her and failed. "You owe me no apology, Your Grace. You owe me nothing at all." "That is not true." "Then say what you have come to say. I have business with you this morning, as it happens, and I would rather have it done than stand here debating the small accounting of your manners." Edmund almost smiled. He did not. But the smallest, strangest pull at the corner of his mouth, a thing his face had not done in 4 years, was nevertheless there and gone, and she saw it. He knew she saw it. Her dark eyes flickered once and steadied. "Your business first, Lady Marlowe." "No, Your Grace, yours." "Mine will take longer." "Then mine will be brief. My father wishes to settle the matter of our board. He has offered Hargrove £40. He cannot pay it. He intends to give you, in lieu of coin, our grey mare, Daisy, who has been with him for 16 years and is, at this point, more family than livestock. I am here to ask you to refuse." "Refuse the mare." "Refuse the mare. Take a note of credit instead. We will pay the £40 within the year. If we cannot, you may have any horse on our place, or none of them, as suits you. But not Daisy. Not while my father lives." She had said it without raising her voice. She had said it the way she said everything, clearly, briefly, and as if she had practiced it in the dark before he came. Edmund stood very still. "Lady Marlowe." "Your Grace." "Your father owes me no £40. "He believes he does, Your Grace. The believing is enough." "He owes me," Edmund said quietly. "No 40 pence. Nothing. He has been a guest in my house, in foul weather, with a broken carriage, on a road he could not control. He owes me nothing at all. I will not accept his mare. I will not accept his note. I will not accept his money. The matter is closed." Charlotte looked at him for a long moment. "He will not accept that, Your Grace." "I know. He will not be able to bear the obligation." "I know that also." "Then, Lady Marlowe." She stopped. Edmund drew one slow breath. He felt the small weight of the object in his right hand, hidden against his side. He felt the dawn light coming up around them through the high windows of the stable, grey and silver and pale gold along the edges of the straw. He felt the foal's curious dark eye on him, and the slow, patient breath of the mare, and the steady, unafraid presence of the woman across the box. He had rehearsed nothing. He had decided, in the small hours of the morning, that he would not rehearse. A woman like this would hear a rehearsal a mile off, and would think the worse of him for it, and would be right to. "There is," he said, "another way to settle the matter." She waited. "Marry me, Lady Marlowe." The stable was perfectly silent. The colt nosed at the hay. Iliad shifted her weight from one back leg to the other, Somewhere far down the aisle, the boy's broom paused, started up again. Charlotte did not move. "Your Grace, hear me out. I have not finished." She closed her mouth. Edmund took a step forward, not toward her, toward the foal. He looked down at the small dark creature in the straw, the foal she had saved 3 nights ago, without ever asking who he was or what he owed her, and he spoke without looking at her. "I will pay your father's debts, all of them. The mortgage on his estate, the arrears of interest, the bills with his merchants, every farthing. I will keep the grey mare in his stable for the rest of her natural life. I will keep his old servants in their positions on full wages for the rest of theirs. I will settle a sum on your father in his own name, so that he never has to ask another man for credit as long as he lives. He will remain in his own house, with every comfort that home can offer him, for as long as he wishes to call it his own. Nothing of his will be touched." He paused. "And I will not require you to leave him. You will live where you wish. If you wish to remain at his side until, for as long as he needs you, you will do so. If you wish to come to Ashcombe, you will come. The arrangement is yours to make. I will not make it for you." He stopped. He looked at last across the foal to where she stood. Her face had gone very pale. She was not looking at him. She was looking down at the foal in the straw between them. She was looking down at the small dark thing she had brought into the world 3 nights ago, with one hand resting flat against Iliad's great warm shoulder. She did not speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was very quiet. "Why?" Edmund was silent. She lifted her eyes. "Why, Your Grace? You despised me 3 days ago. You said so. You told your butler, I do not know how I know, but I do know, that you would rather lose everything than marry me. I heard it in the way you held your newspaper at breakfast. I heard it in the way you spoke to me in your drawing room. I heard it in every silence between us at every meal. 3 days ago you would have paid a fortune to be rid of me. Now you offer to ruin yourself to keep me. Why?" Edmund did not look away from her. "Because 3 nights ago," he said, "you walked into my stable in a borrowed pair of boots and saved a foal I would have lost. And yesterday morning you sat under an oak tree in the cold and read me a passage from Marcus Aurelius about a man who could not master his own mind. And last night you sat in my library and told your father, in a voice so steady I will hear it for the rest of my life, that you did not refuse 3 offers of marriage because you were proud. You refused them because you were his." She had gone, if possible, paler. "You heard." "I heard, Lady Marlowe. I did not mean to. I will not pretend that I did not. I was passing the door, and I heard, and I stayed. I am not proud of it, but I will not lie to you about it now." She closed her eyes for a moment. "Your Grace, I have spent 4 years," he said, "telling myself that I built this fortress because I was wise. I told myself I had learned from a bad marriage that I was not made for love. I told myself that horses were better company than people. I told myself a great many things, Lady Marlowe, that I now understand were not wisdom. They were cowardice. They were the cowardice of a man who had been hurt once, and decided he would prefer the certainty of being alone to the risk of being hurt again." He paused. "You are not my first wife. You are nothing like her. You have shown me in 3 days more honesty than she showed me in 3 years. You have not flattered me once. You have not sought me out. You have not so much as smiled at me unless you had reason to. You came into my house in a storm, and you have behaved every hour you have been here, exactly as you would have behaved in your own house, and I—" His voice did not break, but it dropped. "I would have spent the rest of my life congratulating myself on my good judgment in despising you, if your father's mare had not been quite so old, and if your carriage had not broken on quite so foul a road, and if you had not, in your own infuriating quietness, refused to leave my stable when I told you to." He stopped. The stable was very quiet. Charlotte's hand was still on the mare's shoulder. Her dark eyes were enormous in the grey light. "Marry me, Lady Marlowe," he said again. "Not for the debts, not for the mare, not for your father. Marry me because I am asking you. Marry me because, against every plan I have ever made for myself, I am no longer able to imagine the next day of my life without expecting to see you in it." He took the small object from his hand at last. He held it out, flat in his palm. It was a ring, not the ducal ring of the House of Ashcombe, that great ostentatious thing with the family crest in gold, which had been worn by his first wife for 3 years, and which he had locked in a drawer the day after she left. A smaller ring, old, worn smooth at the band. A single dark green stone set plainly in the center. "This was my mother's," he said. "She put it into my hand the morning she left Ashcombe for the north, 12 years ago now. She told me to give it to a woman whom I would not be ashamed to see wearing it across a breakfast table for the rest of my life. I have not been able until this morning to think of a single woman in England who would not have shamed it." He looked at her. "I do not require an answer this morning. I do not require an answer this week. I do not require any answer at all, Lady Marlowe. That is not the one you wish to give. The arrangements I have offered to your father stand regardless. They are not contingent upon your acceptance. They are not contingent upon anything. They are mine to give, and I am giving them, and I will not have them used as a weight against you. I will not have any weight against you, not today, not ever." He closed his hand around the ring again very gently and lowered it. "I have said what I came to say." He waited. For a long moment, Lady Charlotte Marlowe did not speak. She looked at him across the foal in the straw, the dawn light pale on her face, her dark eyes very steady, one hand still resting on the great warm shoulder of the mare she had saved 3 nights before. She drew one slow breath, and then, in the same low-level voice she had used to tell a panicked stable-yard that she had been born in a stable, in the same voice she had used to read Marcus Aurelius at him in Latin without lifting her eyes from the page, in the same voice with which she had told her father in the dark of his library at midnight that she had refused 3 offers of marriage because she was his, she said, "And what do I take, Your Grace?" Edmund Hartley stood in the grey dawn of his own stable, with his mother's ring closed in his hand, and the woman he had asked to marry him standing 6 feet from him in a green walking dress. And he did not, for the first time in his 32 years on this earth, have a single answer ready on his tongue. He had been prepared, he understood now, for every other response. He had been prepared for her to refuse him. He had been prepared for her to weep, or to laugh, or to walk past him out of the box without a word, or to tell him he had taken leave of his senses, or to thank him calmly and decline. He had not been prepared for her to ask him what she would be receiving. He had not been prepared because for 32 years no woman in his entire life had ever asked him that question. Every woman who had looked at him with interest had looked at him for what he was. The title, the estate, the income, the horses, the name, the thing he could give. He had grown so accustomed, since he was 19 years old, to being a man whose worth was assumed and whose person was incidental, that the simple, quiet question Charlotte Marlowe had just asked him, "And what do I take, Your Grace?" landed in the center of his chest with the force of a small, perfectly aimed stone. She was not asking what the marriage would give her. She was asking what he would give her. She was asking what was left of Edmund Hartley once the title and the estate and the debts paid for her father were set aside on the table. She was asking what the man inside the Duke of Ashcombe had to offer, a woman who had already refused 3 perfectly good marriages, because none of those men had been worth leaving her father for. She was asking, in 5 words, the only question that mattered. And he did not have an answer. He stood in the straw of his own stable and looked at her, and the grey dawn light slowly turned to gold along the high beams of the rafters, and he understood, with the deep, terrible, clarifying certainty of a man who has spent 4 years believing himself to be made of stone, and discovered in a single morning that he is not made of stone at all, that whatever he said next, he would either spend the rest of his life keeping or the rest of his life regretting. He opened his mouth. He did not speak. He closed it again. Charlotte Marlowe waited. She did not press him. She did not soften the question. She did not lower her eyes. She simply stood with her hand on the warm shoulder of the mare and waited, with the patience of a woman who had asked the only question that mattered and was prepared, if necessary, to wait the rest of the morning for an honest answer. The colt, in the straw between them, lifted his small dark head. He looked at the Duke. He looked at the woman. He blinked once, slowly. And the Duke of Ashcombe drew a breath at last, and took a single step forward through the straw, and began very quietly to speak. Chapter 6. What he took, what she gave. "You take," the Duke of Ashcombe said quietly, "a man who has been wrong about almost everything for 4 years. Charlotte did not move. The light was lifting in the high windows above them. The first true gold of morning had begun to touch the rafters of the stable, and the dust hanging in the cold air had turned to a slow, drifting silver. The colt nosed at the straw. Iliad shifted her weight. Somewhere far down the aisle, the boy with the broom had stopped sweeping. The whole world, it seemed to Edmund, was waiting. "Are you Take?" he said, a man who locked away his pride in a bad marriage and his joy in his stables, and convinced himself very thoroughly that he preferred it that way. "You take a man who has not laughed properly in 4 years, who has not slept properly in 3 nights, and who would, until this morning, have told you that he had no use for poetry and no patience for philosophy and no interest in any woman alive." He drew one slow breath. "You take a man who would not have known 3 days ago that he was lonely. You take a man who knows it now. You take a man who has spent the last 20 minutes trying to give you, in the form of debts and properties and old servants in their positions, every gift but the one you actually asked for." He paused. "The one you actually asked for," he said, "is harder." Charlotte's hand had not moved from Iliad's shoulder. Her dark eyes were enormous in the grey-gold light. She did not speak. "You take," Edmund said, "whatever is left of me when the rest is set aside. I do not know precisely what that is. I have not looked at it in a long time. I suspect I will need your help to find it. I suspect there is more of it than I have allowed myself to believe. I suspect there is less of it than you deserve. I am offering it to you anyway, because I do not know what else to offer that would be true." He stopped. He did not look away from her. "That is what you take, Lady Marlowe, if you will have it." The stable was very quiet. Iliad blew out a slow, soft breath through her nostrils and lowered her great dark head another inch toward the hay. The colt, satisfied that nothing of importance was happening to either of the humans in his box, turned his attention back to his mother's flank. Charlotte did not speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice was steady, but it was a different steadiness than before. It was the steadiness of a woman who had decided a thing and was holding it carefully, the way a person carries a candle through a dark corridor. "Your Grace." "Edmund." She paused. "Edmund." "Yes." "You have offered me a great deal this morning. I have offered you what is mine to offer. You have offered me my father's peace. You have offered me a name. You have offered me a place. You have offered me a ring that belonged to your mother, and you have offered me, in the last minute, the only thing that I would not have known how to ask for in plain words." She drew one slow breath. "I will accept all of it." Edmund did not move. For a moment, he was not entirely certain that he had heard her correctly. He had been prepared for hesitation. He had been prepared for conditions. He had been prepared, in the small back room of his mind, where he kept the worst possibilities, for a quiet refusal couched in such grace that he would have walked out of the stable wishing she had simply struck him instead. He had not been prepared for yes. She saw it. Her dark eyes flickered with the smallest, driest spark of something, not amusement, not quite. Recognition. "Did your Grace expect a different answer?" "I expected, Lady Marlowe, I do not know what I expected." "That is the most truthful thing you have said this morning, Edmund." He almost laughed. It came out as a single short breath through his nose, a thing his face had not done in 4 years. And Charlotte saw it, and the corner of her own mouth did the smallest, quietest thing in return, and Edmund Hartley understood, in that moment, that he was going to spend the rest of his life learning to read the small, dry, almost invisible expressions of the woman across the foal in the straw of his own stable, and that he was looking forward to it. "There are conditions," she said. "Name them." "I will not leave my father, not while he needs me. I will spend as much of the year at his house as the arrangement of yours will allow, and bring him to Ashcombe as often as he will come. He has been my whole family for as long as I have been alive. I will not change that now." "Agreed. I will keep the grey mare. She will be moved here, or kept there, exactly as your father wishes. She will be cared for in either place at my expense for the rest of her life. I will continue to read what I please. I will continue to ride. I will not be made into a fashionable wife. Lady Marlowe, the day I attempt to make you into a fashionable wife is the day you should remove this ring and throw it at my head." She did smile then, a real smile, small and brief and so quietly transforming that Edmund almost forgot to breathe. "And one more condition, Edmund. Name it." She paused. "You will not look at me ever again the way you looked at me 3 days ago in your drawing room." Edmund was silent for a long moment. When he answered, his voice had gone low. I do not believe I would know how anymore. She held his eyes. She held them for a long time. And then very slowly, without breaking that look, without lowering her gaze, she lifted her hand from the mare's warm shoulder and held it out to him, palm open, across the small, dark, sleeping foal between them. Edmund stepped through the straw. He did not take the ring from his coat. Not yet. There would be a time for the ring, the proper time, the time when her father was beside her and the small ceremonies of such things could be observed. This was not that time. This was something simpler. He reached across the foal and he took her hand. The first touch was, he would remember it for the rest of his life, astonishingly small. Her hand was cold. Her fingers were narrower than he had imagined. There was a small, faint roughness along the side of her palm, where, he understood with a slow, surprised tenderness, she must have held the reins of a horse for far too many years for a woman who had been raised, by the world's reckoning, to be a lady. Her fingers closed around his. She did not look away from him. He did not look away from her. Above them, in the high windows of the stable, the first true sun of the morning broke at last over the eastern fields, and the grey dawn turned to gold all at once, and the long dust-silvered aisle of the stable filled, for one slow suspended moment, with the kind of pale yellow light that English country mornings give freely, and English country evenings remember for a long time afterward. Charlotte's hand was very warm in his now. "Good morning, Edmund." "Good morning, Lottie." It was the first time he had said her name. He had not planned to. It had simply come, the shortened private name her father used for her, the name he had heard whispered once in the dark of the library at midnight, when an old man had been weeping in a chair and his daughter had been kneeling beside him. She did not correct him. She closed her eyes for the smallest fraction of a second, the way a person closes their eyes when a sound has unexpectedly become music. And then she opened them again, and she squeezed his hand once very gently, and she said in a voice so quiet that the colt in the straw between them did not even lift his head, "You should go and speak with my father." He spoke with the Baron in the library. It was a brief conversation by the standards of such conversations. Edmund did not sit. Lord Marlowe did not at first understand. When he did understand, he stood up out of his chair with a kind of slow, trembling carefulness, and he said nothing at all for a long moment, and then he said very quietly, "You will be good to her. I will spend the rest of my life trying, my lord. She will not let you fail. I am counting on that, my lord." The old man's eyes filled. He did not let the tears fall. He simply held out his hand, not the formal hand of a baron to a duke, but the plain, worn hand of a father. And Edmund took it and held it, and the two men stood in the library of Ashcombe Hall in the bright golden morning and did not speak for a long time. When at last the Baron found his voice again, he said only, "Daisy stays with me. Daisy stays with you, my lord, for the rest of her natural life, with every comfort an old mare can be given, on my word." The Baron nodded once. He sat down again, very slowly, in his chair by the fire. Edmund left him there. In the corridor outside the library, Hargrove was standing, entirely by coincidence Edmund was certain, with a small silver tray in his hand, on which sat 2 glasses of something pale and unhurried. "Your Grace." "Hargrove." The butler did not smile. The butler had not smiled in any visible way in 40 years of service at Ashcombe Hall, but the corner of his mouth, the same corner that had, 3 mornings ago in this same house, twitched at a tea service while his master had told him he would rather lose everything than marry the woman now standing beside the mare in the stable. That corner did very briefly the smallest, driest thing. "May I offer your Grace my congratulations?" "You may, Hargrove." "On behalf of the household, your Grace. On behalf of the household, Hargrove. And on behalf, your Grace, of your grandfather, who would like her very much." For a long moment, Edmund Hartley did not speak. Then he reached out very briefly and laid his hand on the old butler's shoulder, a thing he had not done in his life. And Hargrove, with the dignity of a man who had been standing in this house since before Edmund was born, inclined his head a single, quiet inch. "Thank you, Hargrove." "Your Grace." Edmund walked out of the corridor into the long, bright hall. Beyond the great front doors, the morning sun was high now over Ashcombe Hall. The storm that had brought them was a thing of 3 nights ago, gone, scattered, forgotten by the sky. Somewhere in the stable, a woman in a green walking dress was finishing the brushing of a mare. The Duke of Ashcombe stepped out into the sunlight to go and find her. Epilogue. The year turned gold. 3 months later, late spring at Ashcombe Hall. The colt had a name now. Charlotte had chosen it one afternoon at the paddock fence, watching him kick up his heels in the long grass. "Storm," she had said. Edmund had looked at her. "You wished to name him after the night your carriage broke." "I wished to name him after the night I met you, Edmund. The carriage breaking was simply how I arrived." The wedding had been small by Charlotte's wish. They had been married in the old stone chapel on a clear morning in late April. The Baron had given his daughter's hand to the Duke of Ashcombe and wept quietly, and had been allowed to weep without ceremony, because Edmund had wished it so. It had been, by every quiet measure that mattered, the finest wedding either of them could have imagined. Now, a month later, on an ordinary Tuesday, they sat together on the old stone bench at the edge of the paddock. The grass was full of late spring buttercups. Storm, long-legged now, glossy, was running in slow, delighted loops along the lower fence. Edmund set his hand very gently against the back of his wife's hand. "Lottie." "Edmund, I told my butler once," he said, "that I would rather lose everything than marry you. I know you did. I have been thinking about that lately." He looked at her at last. "I would lose everything else first, every other thing in my life, the estate, the horses, the name, the title. I would lose all of it gladly, before I would lose what I took on the morning you let me take your hand across a foal in my own stable." She was silent for a long moment. Then she pressed her own palm flat against his and held it there. "I knew, Edmund. You knew." "I have known," she said quietly, "since you said my name in the stable." He leaned in slowly, and he kissed her. It was not a hurried kiss. It was the kiss of a man who had spent 4 years building a fortress and 3 months learning to let it fall. When at last they parted, her forehead came to rest very gently against his. "Your father is coming to stay for the summer," he murmured. "I know he is. Hargrove has put him in the south room, the one with the view of the rose walk. Hargrove is the kindest man in England." She laughed, small, quiet, and entirely her own. Edmund looked at her in the gold light, and he thought of the grey dawn of his own stable 3 months before, and the foal in the straw, and the 5 quiet words that had broken the most controlled man in England. "And what do I take, your grace?" He had not in the end been able to give her an answer that morning. He had given her a life instead. In the pasture, Storm trotted back toward his mother, who was grazing peacefully in the long grass of an English country morning. The buttercups in the lower pasture had, by then, turned entirely to gold. I hope this story stayed with you. If it did, leave a like, subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments which scene you loved most. Thank you for spending this hour at Ashcombe Hall. Until the next story.